All right, it looks like we're on air. So, Professor Sy Garte, you're a professor of biochemistry, is that correct?
Oh, no, I'm retired. I was a professor of environmental health. My PhD is in biochemistry.
Awesome. And you're a theist. You believe there is a God.
Yes.
Well, I am an atheist, by which I mean I don't believe there is any reason to believe in the existence of a God. And I'd like to hear what reasons do you believe there are for believing in a God, and then I'd like to tell you my position on those reasons, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts on my position.
Okay. So I should start?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I wasn't always a theist. I was raised in a atheist household, and grew up with a very strong atheism. My parents believed that there could not be a God. It was impossible for there to be a God, and they were very anti-Christianity, for example. And so I had that worldview starting out. My father was also a scientist. He was a chemist, physical chemist. And I went into science and became a biochemist. During the early part of my life, I did have a few inklings that perhaps my worldview was not accurate. It was highly materialistic, reductionist, naturalist. And there were several things that I really couldn't understand about my idea of how the universe worked. And that included a sort of a feeling of missing something, which I later found out was spirituality, which it was also very highly frowned upon, in addition to believing in God. And I just began to feel that there was something, inadequate about the pure materialist outlook, even from a scientific standpoint. And when I began learning, especially began learning some of the more modern, I'm pretty old, so when I was young, quantum mechanics, of course, is well known. I'm not that old, but it wasn't being taught very much in schools until I got to college, and then began to see that there were some things about science, about physics, the physics of nature, that were disturbingly irrational, is the way I put it. And I began questioning a lot of my assumptions about the ideas I had that the universe was not only rational but understandable from a human point of view. And I would also say that I was of that generation of atheists who actually were humanists. We believed, and this goes back to the earlier atheists like Bertrand Russell and those, that human beings were special, that free will was real. All of that has been rejected by the modern version of atheism. And at the time, the main thing that struck me was that, again, that science was, first of all, a wonderful way to understand the natural world. And I have never, lost that understanding or belief. And I am still an active scientist. But on the other hand, I knew that there was a whole realm of reality that was not addressable by science. Again, I first learned that from my father, who was a very, very strong atheist, who was a scientist. And most scientists understood that the scientific method is not meant to deal with a whole variety of questions and issues that are outside of the scientific realm of thinking. Again, that has also gone away in modern atheism, which tends to embrace what is now called scientism, which is that science is the only epistemology for anything that you might want to know about truth. So it wasn't that much of a jump for me to start thinking about, about religion as maybe having something to do with truth. But and at some point I got to the point where I was thinking, well, materialism is not all there is. There's something else. I don't know what it is, but it must be something else. And that did not make me a theist, never mind a Christian. And what did drive me in that direction were mostly personal experiences. I finally went to a church when I was in my 40s, late 40s, for the first time ever in my life. And I was quite struck and astonished by what I experienced at church. It was nothing like what I thought it was going to be. I thought I would be harangued about about sin and brimstone and hell and all the stuff that I'd heard about. And it was not that at all. It was actually a very loving message. This was a Catholic church, happened to be. And I was interested. I had read the Gospels when I was younger as an academic exercise, but I read them again and I began to think about them and take them more seriously. And then I'm not going to go on and on because it gets boring. But at some point, I began thinking about the idea of actually, embracing Christianity. But that took a very long time because I couldn't see my way to doing it. It just seemed irrational and something that wasn't part of me. I couldn't understand how anyone could believe in, something that was untestable and something that seemed to still violate what I thought of common sense and the rules of science. So it was very hard. I mean, I kind of wanted to be a believer in some way, maybe, but I also was not happy about doing it. And then I had some personal experiences which changed my mind, culminating in an experience which I considered to have come directly from the Holy Spirit at this point. And that was about maybe a dozen years ago, not that long ago. And that convinced me, those experiences convinced me, and I became a Christian and a fairly active and devoted one. And I was able, surprisingly, to not go insane by any contradictions between being a scientist and a Christian. And I thought I was the only one in the universe. I didn't know there were any other Christians who were scientists. And then I discovered Francis Collins' book, The Language of God, and I thought, well, at least there's two of us, and it turns out there's a lot more than two. There are quite a few, and have always been quite a few. So that's a summary. I have written a book which is in the publication stages, which describes all of this journey in great detail, including a lot of the science involved. It won't be out for another almost a year, I guess. It's now in the editing phases, but that really goes into great detail. So this is sort of a thumbnail sketch, and I have some blog posts that describe more of it. But I think that's enough for me to talk now, and I'll let you have a chance.
All right, so just to make sure I understand your position, you said that you came to the realization that science, there is some other realm of reality other than the material world, and science can't get us to discover what that material realm is. And you said you had personal experiences, and you believe that this methodology of personal experience can justify belief in what this other realm is. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
You would agree that many personal experiences are very flawed. Like people have personal experiences of homeopathy
Sure.
and ghosts and all kinds
Absolutely.
of things. So why would yours be any different from those unreliable personal experiences?
Well, I mean, this is a question of asking what is truth and what is reliable, and the answer is, I think that for everything, including a scientific worldview, you have to feel that whatever your experiences is, it's true for you. I'm not an apologist. I guess I should have started out with that. I have never tried to convince anyone, any atheist, to become a theist based on arguments. I don't think that would work, and I don't think it's a productive way to pursue things. I will say that I have been involved in the conversion of a few atheists, one at the moment, in fact, but not by giving them arguments and saying that this is objectively true, so you should believe it. but by encouraging them to question things and to look for experiences. Now, I realized after I had converted that I had many experiences throughout my life, which were the voice of God trying to tell me things, and I simply either closed my ears or eyes, or I just brushed them off as what you said, as illusions or delusions, or just wanting to believe in something, and so you saw it. But that's not that doesn't happen to me very often. For someone like me who is extremely skeptical by nature, scientifically trained, someone who really doesn't believe things unless there's a great deal of evidence. The idea that I would, have a experience which was false or somewhat delusional, it's not impossible, but it's not something that's likely. And the experiences that I had fit into that category. So for me, the proof that those were real is adequate enough for me to believe. They may not be adequate enough for you to believe me, and I don't intend them to be. I mean, I'm not saying that they would be. I also did a lot of reading. I read not only the Gospels, but in addition to being a scientist, my main hobby is history, and I love reading history. Just as fun. And I read a lot of history about the history of the Christian religion, how it started. And I know about the controversies, but there are some facts, indisputable facts about the origin of Christianity that to me are very supportive of the idea that Jesus did rise from the dead, and that the resurrection was real. And I think that's the key issue. If the resurrection was real, then Christianity is true. If the resurrection was false, it's not. So that's an important issue to look into, and I did look into it, and my conclusion from what I read was that, yeah, it's probably real. I'm not sure it's real, but it's probably real.
So I have two questions for you there. I
Sure.
agree with you that empirical science can't tell us what the fundamental nature of reality is. I agree there is some realm out there, which is what I call metaphysics, and science can't get us there.
Yeah.
But I would say that the same reason science can't get us there, personal experience also can't get us there. So from my perspective, it would be equally unreasonable to trust our personal experience gives us information about that realm as it is to trust empirical science is giving us information about that realm.
Why do you feel that way?
Because there are big problems. The same problems that exist in science that prevent us from doing that also exist in personal experience and philosophy and a priori knowledge in every realm of human knowledge, along with many others that don't exist in empirical science. As far as
Right.
I know. Go ahead.
So I see what you're saying, and it's interesting. But then the question arises: what you're really saying is that there is no way, because what other ways are there? What other ways are there to delve into that realm and try to understand what it is and if it's real? If you can't use science, which we agree on, if you can't use philosophy or personal experiences, what else do we have?
Well, there could just be many undiscovered methodologies that we don't know about yet. That could
That's
get us
true.
there.
I agree with that. I'll agree with that.
So I just think that the personal experience and our current empirical knowledge, neither of these are good enough. So I don't think it's reasonable to
Right.
believe either of them. So I think we should wait and withhold judgment until we do find that other methodology that can get us there.
I completely agree with that for you. And I would have agreed with that for me too, at maybe 15, 20 years ago. I would have said, yeah, you're right. However, I changed my mind, and the reason I changed my mind was that some of these experiences were just too powerful to resist. And, C.S. Lewis has this wonderful quote, which is that I believe in Christianity the way I believe in the sun, not because I think it exists, but because by its light, I see that everything else that exists. And when I became a Christian, when I began to say to myself, I think I believe in Christ, I think I'm a Christian. And the first thing I did when I said that to myself was, okay, now, so what does that do? What is the effect of that on me? it could have been really bad. It could have been, well, I can't do science anymore, okay, or I have to drop believing in evolution, or I have to, I don't know, play with snakes, or do something crazy like some of the fundamentalists. But instead, what happened was so many things began to make sense to me on so many levels, and that continues to this day, to the point where now I feel like I awoke into a reality, or I, came out of a deep water into light, and that surprised me. I wasn't looking for that. I didn't expect that, but it happened, and so that kind of cemented the conversion very quickly thereafter.
But you mentioned you researched the historicity, and you said that you came to the conclusion that it's reasonable to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I've
Yeah,
also done a decent amount of research into the history. Can you tell me a little bit about
I know.
why you think it's reasonable to believe Jesus rose from the dead from the historical accounts?
The main reason, I think, and this is interesting, have you seen Paul Poloja? You know who Poloja is, right? On
Yeah, he's
Twitter. Yeah.
another YouTuber.
And he posted a very interesting scenario, I think he calls it, of how Christianity could have come to be without a resurrection. And he claims it makes a lot of sense, and it kind of does, with one big gap. And the big gap, which is, and I looked this up, and it's true. What happened was, okay, Christ was reputed to have died and risen in the 30s AD, and by 70 years later, by 100 AD, there were 1 million Christian followers around the empire, all scattered around. Now, the canonical view of that is that the apostles spread out and spread the word. Paul was, of course, writing letters. He was writing letters in the 60s, and he was writing letters to already established churches in Asia Minor, in Greece, in Africa, all over the place. And the question is then, where these churches come from? And the answer seems to have been that it was spread by word of mouth and by people who had witnessed the resurrection and were so passionate about what they had seen that they were able to do that effectively, and even in some cases with persecution and danger. But Paul's scenario is different. His view is that Peter, and this part kind of makes sense, Peter felt very guilty about his betrayal of Christ at the end, and he had some illusions, the kind you were referring to, and thought that maybe Christ had risen, and he had this illusion, and Paul, the same thing, also felt guilty and had an illusion. And Peter, which is critical because Peter obviously had to do it first, began telling people this, and word spread. And that's where the churches came from. But I find that, and I've written to Paul, and he hasn't completely answered it. I find that very hard to believe that a fisherman acknowledged to be illiterate by himself somewhere in Galilee was able to convince enough people around him to spread this word, where people were completely skeptical of Jesus during his lifetime, right? I mean, certainly within Judea, he would go to places and people, only a small number of people would follow him. Most just said no. And somehow the theory is that this word of mouth, because Peter wasn't writing anything, spread through the ancient world within a couple of decades, to the point where there were churches established, and a few years after that, we had 1 million followers around the empire. I don't see that. That, to me, is not reasonable. I find it much more reasonable that the biblical account is more accurate. The account given in Acts, for example, which is highly detailed, and there's just too much in there to deny. It's too historical in tone to deny that, to think that, well, no, this was just made up. Yeah, it could have been, but it's not reasonable to me.
Yeah, I would agree. I accept most of the historicity of the Bible. I only reject the miracle side. But I had a question for you. The growth of Christianity, do you think that's different from the growth of many other religions? Because as far as I know, it's about the same with lots of other religions, and there are some that grow much faster than Christianity did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's true. But for example, with Islam, which is the best example of rapid growth, that was mediated largely by conquest and by violent requirement to convert or else. Mormonism is often painted that way, and yeah, Mormonism grew very quickly and still growing at some accounts. But the difference is that this was in a local area. Sorry. Um, and it occurred in modern days where there is writing, there's lots of ways to spread messages, and a lot. And these days, look at. I mean, forget about it now. You you could have viral memes spreading throughout the world in a day. Uh, in Peter's day, writing was the internet. I mean, writing was an amazing technology that he didn't have access to, and most of his listeners wouldn't have had access to be able to read anything that anybody wrote. So, Paul was unusual in that he was an educated Roman and he was able to write in Greek. And he sent his letters to churches where there's someone who could read them and would read them to the congregations. But I think Christianity was somewhat unique in that respect. It may not be the only one. There have been other religions, but that have grown rapidly, and Islam very successfully as well. But again, remember that Islam was 700 years later. Muhammad was able to dictate his words to someone who wrote them down, and they were spread, to that extent. So I'm not saying that Islam is false and Christianity is true because of that. I mean, let's remember that Islam, is a very particular kind of religion. It's not based on this kind of revelation. And on the other hand, it does mimic Christianity and Judaism in being monotheistic. In other words, that there's one God who is transcendent, not lots of gods who have certain characteristics and not others, which is what it was until monotheism became popular. So yeah, monotheistic religions can spread quickly, and I think because they have a lot of appeal.
Well,
But
I'm thinking
other
more of
reasons as well.
Well, I'm thinking of more
Sorry.
examples like Falun Gong, which is the fastest growing
Uh-huh.
religion in human history, and other Eastern religions that predate Christianity that grew at a similar rate in their time period without writing. So it seems that it happens quite often in human history, and not just for religions, for many kinds of ideologies and
Yeah,
political positions and all kinds of things.
they can. Now, of course, modern day like Falun Gong, it doesn't count because these days, as I said, you can come up with anything and it spreads like wildfire through the internet or even telephone, which is amazing technology also. In terms of other religions, yes, they can spread quickly, but they don't necessarily last very long. They don't have that stable base. And many of them, Falun Gong is an exception, but again, that doesn't count because it's very modern. Most of them are not suppressed the way Christianity was. I mean, it's true that not every Christian was hounded and persecuted. However, during Nero, which again is right in the middle of the growth of Christianity, the Nero persecutions resulted in the deaths of all the leaders: Peter, Paul, Mark, forgetting John. No, not John. John's the one who didn't. John was the only one who survived, but all the other leaders of Christianity were killed. It kept going and it continued to expand. So, you have to wonder why people would be so passionate and so sure of themselves if they hadn't either witnessed or had testimony of witness of this miraculous event. That's my view. Now, I think every historical event, including spreads of religions, is its own thing and needs to be looked at separately. Uh, Again, I don't think this historical evidence proves Christianity. There's almost nothing that proves anything, as you probably will agree. I mean, that's certainly outside of science. We don't talk about proof. It's the weight of the evidence, and I think the weight of the evidence for me. And I'll admit that I was biased because I only looked into this once I became a Christian, and I don't think I would have left Christianity if the evidence had been negative. I would have come up with probably something else. But in this case, I think it was pretty compelling that that something happened, and it wasn't just a word of mouth about some itinerant preacher who, there were so many itinerant preachers at the time, which Paul admits. Why this one spread and not so many others. I mean, John the Baptist was a precursor to Christ, and there were many, many others who came and went. But this one worked, so there had to be some reason.
I know you said Falun Gong doesn't count, but from my perspective, it was persecuted against just as much as Christianity, and
Yeah.
the Chinese government puts a pretty heavy restriction on internet and social media. They completely restrict it, so it spread mostly by word of mouth as well, as far as I know.
Within China.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to your other point about the historicity, from my perspective, I don't believe any of the miracles in the Bible happen. I don't think that's reasonable to believe. I grant pretty much everything else about the natural explanations about Jesus' existence and the empty tomb and the people seeing him after he died or claiming to have seen a vision of him or whatever. But I don't think it's reasonable to believe any of the miracles actually happened based on the Bible.
Okay, so miracle is an interesting question. So let's say we were having this discussion. It wouldn't be online. It would be probably sitting in a house somewhere. Let's say we were having this discussion in 1880. And I had some kind of a crazy vision that someday we would be able to have cell phones and computers and things that operate, and there would be radioactivity, all these things that operate on quantum mechanics, on the principles of quantum mechanics. And you asked what that was, and I said, well, it's interesting. It turns out that the whole idea that if you want to go from point A to point B, you have to pass everything in between. It turns out that's not right. You can jump directly from A to B, especially if you're a packet of energy. You would look at me and say, well, that's superstitious miracle nonsense. Then you'd be right. It would be at that time. Well, it's not. It's now part of science. So I think that to say you don't believe in miracles is legitimate, but we don't know what's a miracle and what isn't, do we?
Absolutely, I agree. So let me make it a little more specific. If
Sure.
I told you I saw a dog, that would be reasonable to believe because we have lots of implicit empirical evidence of dogs. There's lots of things about dogs we know about from science, even if I don't mention them explicitly in the statement, like their taxonomy, phylogeny, genetic makeup, chemical composition. But if I told you I saw a unicorn, that would not be reasonable to believe. And the reason it wouldn't be reasonable is because it doesn't have an implicit empirical basis. There's no background knowledge about science that supports it. So from my perspective, no amount of testimony is reasonable to support anything that lacks an empirical basis, which means miracles, magic, mythical creatures, the paranormal, the supernatural, UFOs. No amount of testimony can justify belief in those things until you provide an empirical basis for them.
I actually agree with that, and I don't believe in UFOs, and I don't believe in pyramids, and I don't believe in crystals, and I don't believe. I mean, I had a very interesting discussion with Aaron Ra some months, maybe it was a year ago, where he told me that this, the sort of the new age wooey stuff he used to believe in, and when he found out it was all fake, he was very upset. And I agreed with him, and I understood his point. So the question then is, okay, so if I told you I saw a unicorn, you would dispute me, and you'd be correct. But now, what if I told you that, and the next day somebody else told you that they saw a unicorn, and then 2 days later you were overhearing a conversation where people said, "Did you see that unicorn? They're all over the place." Would you start to wonder if maybe there was something that looked like a unicorn that was running around? Or would you think everybody had been deluded?
I would think everyone had been deluded until provided empirical evidence, because I can use the exact same example and say that's exactly what happened in the cases of UFOs and exactly what happened in the cases of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. And we have lots of different levels of eyewitness testimony. Like we can go from the hundreds in the case where people have seen Bigfoot, which has several hundred eyewitness testimonies, to the
Right.
case of thousands, where we see people who've seen like Ouija boards and supernatural kinds of things in that respect. And then we can go to
Right.
tens of thousands in the case of ghosts and astral projections or whatever. And then we can go to hundreds of thousands in the case of homeopathy, and millions in the case of homeopathy. So we can go up to even every single human being who's ever lived and say, if I showed you a picture of an optical illusion, you will see it moving. So as far as I can tell, the amount of eyewitness testimony makes absolutely no difference. It has
Okay,
to have an
fair
empirical
enough.
basis.
That's fair enough. Right. So an empirical basis would mean that you yourself saw whatever we're talking about, or that wouldn't really work either, would it?
Right. By empirical basis, I mean predictable, novel, testable predictions confirmed by peer review. Science, essentially.
Okay. Okay. Right. Well, I mean, that's fair. I don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus and all the miracles that are in the Bible in the same way that I believe that genes are made up of DNA. I believe them both, but in different ways and for different reasons and with different epistemologies. I also don't believe in the existence of love through either the empirical method, which is very reliable, or the or the way that I believe in Jesus miracles. So I think that depending on what it is we're talking about, there are different appropriate and legitimate epistemologies. Now, when we're talking about things like UFOs, we'll take that as the example, better than unicorns, because a lot of people believe they've seen them. That, I think, is a legitimate thing to want to see, as you put it, objective, verifiable evidence, because it's a phenomenon that it's claimed to be a purely natural phenomenon. Okay, there's actual UFO that's flying in the sky, probably manned by aliens who either mean us harm or good. That's a statement and a claim of natural reality. Okay, so it should be investigated according to natural reality. Things like, does love exist, and many philosophical issues are not that. So we don't need to apply the same rigid standards that you would apply to something like, okay, astrology is real, because you're making a claim of natural reality. When you're talking about the miracles in the Bible, you're talking about something that you believe happened, but it's something outside, not part of natural reality. That's the definition of a miracle. So you can't say that I'm going to see whether a miracle is real, because by definition, it's not real according to, it's not repeatable, it's not objectively verifiable, it's not something you can subject in a laboratory. Because if it were, it wouldn't be a miracle, it would be part of nature and just a new facet. So quantum mechanics, for example, is not miraculous, it turns out. You might have thought it was when I first described it to you, but it turns out no, it's part of physics that we never understood, and in fact still don't, but at least we know it's real. So you see that distinction? It's why believing in miracles doesn't bother me, because I'm believing in them. It's a belief, it's a faith. I don't believe in, people ask you, do you believe in evolution? And of course the correct answer is no. I accept evolution. It's been proven to my satisfaction. The example I like to use is the IRS. Do you have faith in the IRS? Do you believe in it? No, it's real. It's there. You can't deny it. It has a building. It has people. It takes your money. There's no question it's real. So, we use some kinds of evidence for looking at material reality. It's part of the natural universe, and we don't use those. But now you can say, well, what's the difference with ghosts? Ghosts are also outside of that. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe there are ghosts. I would like to see evidence of that. I haven't. But if I did, and the ghost explained to me that he or she was actually not part of this world, but part of a different world, supernatural world, and therefore I'll never see them again. It's not going to be repeated. I have to think about that. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. There are definitely different epistemologies to apply to different contexts. I think that
Right.
the way I phrase it is that conceptual claims require conceptual evidence, empirical claims require empirical evidence.
There you go. You said that much better than I did.
But I would still go back to what I originally said. I don't think either of those goes to what the fundamental nature of reality is. So if you tried to use the conceptual or empirical methodology to describe the fundamental nature of reality, I would say that's a category error and it wouldn't apply.
So why is the nature of reality so difficult to understand?
Well, the reason I would say neither of these epistemologies can get to that is because they both face these insurmountable problems. Like, for example, are you familiar with the position of metaphysical naturalism, the position that there's just no supernatural at all?
Yes.
Even if we grant all of the evidence of the natural world, that doesn't support metaphysical naturalism because it'll always just be something else we haven't discovered yet out there, which is the supernatural. And we could apply the same thing to personal experience, but it would be called the problem of the criterion. So in our personal experience, we can say the same thing. Even the evidence of our feelings doesn't mean that those feelings correspond to some fundamental nature of reality. It's just a feeling in our head as far as we can tell, and we'd have to demonstrate it's not just that to justify that it's some fundamental part of reality.
But so my question is, justify to whom?
To ourselves, I would guess, is that there needs to be some kind of epistemology to justify the proposition.
Right. Exactly. So that's my position. My position is that whatever I think is real, whatever I choose to believe in, has to be justified to myself, and I have a high bar. By chance, not everybody has a high bar. I do. So I trust that, and again, I may be wrong. Okay, this all may be an illusion, but I do trust my ability for myself to apply my understanding of reality and decide what it is that I feel is true. I'm not sure we can go beyond that. That's kind of in line with what you're saying, actually, that we're left with that since we don't have a method to get the absolute foundational ground of reality. What are we left with? We're left with what we just said, basically. We have to justify to ourselves that what we believe is true, because nobody wants to consciously think that what they're believing is false. That kind of cognitive dissonance. So yeah, that's where we are.
Well, my position is I think we should withhold judgment. I don't think we should make a claim about what the fundamental nature of reality is. We should just say we don't know and just stop. And so I think
I was there for a very long time. I mean, decades. And that's what I said. The issue of God never came up in my mind. I didn't care about it. I had other things to do. I was trying to get papers published and grants funded. I didn't care about God, one way or the other, real or not real. I started caring about it when I began to think that, wait a minute, I'm getting convinced here, by personal experiences and things. So I think I think your view is perfectly legitimate. I don't disagree with it for you, because I was in the same position. So and I thought it was perfectly appropriate for me then. If after this interview is over and you rise from that chair or sofa, I can't tell, and start walking to the kitchen and you see a vision of Jesus Christ, your whole concept may change about reality, or may not. You might decide, well, I shouldn't have had that extra glass of whatever it was you're drinking. This is not real. And as I said, I did have experiences like that as a young man, which affected me deeply, and which I just put away. I said, no, that's illusion. That's nonsense. That's very rare, but it happened once or twice.
So
I'm not so sure.
I have a problem with the Christian definition of a God because of the whole all-powerful, all-good thing. Those seem to be contradictory to me. I think it's impossible for there to be an all-good, all-powerful God who would not have created the best of all possible worlds, and this is definitely not the best of all possible worlds. So I think I can rule out the Christian God. There could be a God, maybe, but I think the Christian God is definitely one that's not likely.
Well, that's a hard one to argue with because I mean, I know Christians who really cannot deal with that question. They are people very close to me who believe that, this problem of evil in a God-created world is just, there's no answer to it. And there have been quite a few theologians. Thomas Ward is one of them, who wrote a couple of books. One is called God Can't, that just came out, and he's kind of a radical theologian. He's a great guy. I happen to know him, but and his main book is The Uncontrolling Love of God, and he's trying to deal with this issue. It's a very difficult issue. Most theologians spend a lot of time dealing with theodicy. Thank the Lord, I'm not a theologian, so I could give myself a pass. But I've thought about the issue, and I actually have a few thoughts. They're not terrible. I don't think they're terribly compelling, but I think that this is not the best of all possible worlds, and there is suffering and death. And Christianity acknowledges that, because the man who we worship, who was partially a man and also God, but while he was a man, he suffered and died, and suffered terribly. And so, the reason that Peter, at the time of the crucifixion, rejected Christ, and in fact almost everybody did, except his mother and Mary Magdalene and a couple of other women, was that in those days, and even today possibly, nobody's going to worship someone who is killed in such a way, in a way of shame. How is that a leader? How is that a person of power? And the potency of Christianity is that we all feel that way. We all occasionally feel that we're nailed to a cross, or our life is just impossible and we're doomed. And yet Jesus rose from the dead. And when Peter realized that, it completely changed his viewpoint from utter despair to utter joy. And Paul had the same experience on the road. I mean, he had been persecuting these heretics, these infidels, basically, who were claiming that a mere human could be the Son of God. That's totally against Jewish law. And then he had this experience where he saw Christ, and he just completely changed his views. And the question, so the point about that is, we have a model for suffering. And the model tells us, and this is part of the faith, is that you're not going to avoid suffering in this life. There is going to be suffering. But the good news, okay, the gospel, the good news is that Jesus Christ died and rose, and you will rise as well. So the final victory will be yours, no matter how bad things seem. Now, that's a big stretch for a non-Christian or an atheist to follow. It took me a while to get to that point, but I find that very powerful and very compelling. Now, that doesn't relieve suffering, and people on Twitter are always, saying things like, what about this virus, and what about that horrible thing, and et cetera. And yeah, there's no question that this is not a great world, but it kind of depends on how you look at it. How great is this world, this planet that we live on, compared to Venus? It's better, right? It's better than any other planet we know anything about. We can live here, which is pretty miraculous. Not only do we live here, but we, meaning all life forms, can evolve to look at the universe and say, wow, here we are. Who knew, right? I mean, that's remarkable. Talk about a miracle. If you were hanging out somehow in a disembodied state a few billion years ago, and you saw the earth forming, and then you somehow or other you saw, little bacteria floating around, and you'd say, well, that's really amazing, that's remarkable. But then you went away for a while and you came back and you saw us. What would you call that? Here is, part of the universe that's looking at itself. I mean, we're natural beings, and yet, are we? Are we just simply natural beings? We're miraculous. We are miraculous entities, every single one of us. And so maybe it's not such a bad world after all. And yeah, we suffer and die, but the fact is we also live, and we also have joy occasionally. And that's pretty good.
Yeah, I'd agree. But the way I see it is that if there was really an all-good, all-powerful God, he would have given each individual the option to choose for themselves if they wanted to live in this kind of a world or one of their own design, essentially, without suffering. And the
He
fact
does.
Or can I snap my fingers and go to my own universe right now? It's not working.
Not
Why
right
isn't it
now.
working, Sy?
No, not right now. But someday you can.
Because that seems to be immoral to me. That seems to be like the definition of slavery. I've been forced to be in this world against my will, without my consent, to appeal to somebody else's plan, which I had no say in. That seems to be like by the definition of slavery. And so if there was really an all-good, all-powerful God, he would have given every individual the right to choose for themselves if they would voluntarily be a part of this suffering world, or if they would rather just go to their own universe.
That's an interesting, I never heard that before. That's interesting. Okay. So in some ways, you are much more of a supernaturalist than I am. Because I never would have thought of that. I think of this as, I think of the ground state here as being, we're all natural creatures and we're living on a natural world. And then it turns out there is a God who is telling us, well, if you don't like this world, do your best and believe that there is hope, believe in me, believe in Christ, and you will have a chance to choose if you choose to do so. You have free will. So you have the free will to believe. And if you do, and if you choose, that's a choice, that you will do the best you can in this world. You will follow commandments of loving your fellow creatures, and you will do good works as much as you can, and you will believe in Jesus Christ. And if you choose to follow that, you've made the choice for eternal life in a better world, in a magical world. Because see, the thing about this world is, how good could it be without becoming magical? Okay, so for example, to be absurd about it, pretty soon there's going to be a very important game being played in this country, right? We both heard of that. It's not possible for both teams to win, is it? So there are a lot of people rooting for both teams. Some of those, half of those people roughly, are going to be very upset and disappointed. The other's going to be very happy. Now, that's a trivial example, but the truth is, the example I like to give is, you're watching a nature show and you're seeing these cute little bunnies and rabbits, and then this horrible fox comes and grabs a baby bunny and carries it off, and it's dead. And now you have the same scene shot from a different angle, which is the fox's lair, where there are little baby foxes who are starving, and the mother fox comes and takes care of the babies and gives them some food, which happens to be the baby bunny, but that's not being stressed here. Now, one way or the other, one is sympathetic to the creatures who are being featured, but the truth of the matter is that predation, which a lot of people are very upset about, in a good world there would be no predation. Yeah, in a magical world there would be no predation. In a real world there has to be predation. That's a biological fact. If nobody ate anything else and everything was a vegetarian, well, that wouldn't really work. It just doesn't. That's not how ecology works. That's not how you can have a world of life. Now, should it be so bad that their evolution produced these horrible viruses, which are, parasites and do terrible things? No, it would be much better if there weren't. But guess what? A lot of the evils of the natural world that we know about are being conquered by us. And that's pretty remarkable. In other words, as bad as things are when we look around us, how much worse were they within living memory? I know you talk about tsunamis and earthquakes and diseases and all these horrible things, that car accidents, all these horrible things that happen. Well, there's a lot less of it than there used to be. There's a lot less starvation. There's a lot less ignorance. There's a lot more education. Humans somehow are fixing things. There's a lot less. There's no cholera. Now, there may be measles coming back, but we don't want to get into that story because it's another topic. It's just one I'm passionate about. But, smallpox is gone. Hopefully that won't come back. Many of the diseases that used to ravage humanity are no longer real. And we have other things that ravage humanity. People now get very upset if they're called by the wrong pronoun. Okay, 100 years ago, being called by the wrong pronoun was not a big issue. Now it is, because, as things get better, the things that seem bad become less, more. But we'll never be at a point where everybody is absolutely happy all the time and says, this is great. What a perfect world we live in. I mean, if my grandfather, who I knew, could see how I live today, he wouldn't be able to believe it. I mean, he was born in 1890. He walked across Europe with a sack of tools and, got on a boat. This world would be astonishing to him. I mean, he used to tell me that he ate nothing but potatoes until he was 16. Never knew what a vegetable was. So, okay, I eat much better than he did, and that keeps happening. Now, why does that happen? This is not an argument for God. You can say the same thing and be a humanist and say, well, human beings are really terrific. We can do all these great things. But that raises the question, why? How is that possible? Why are we able to do all this? And I think that's somehow related to the creation as well.
Well, my take on it, I don't want to go to the magic approach. Are you familiar with the movie The Matrix?
Oh, yes, very much.
So in a few hundred years, we can have the technological capability to give everyone their own universe, which they can do whatever they want in. So we can have a game of Patriots or whoever the two teams are playing, and whoever's team you like, they can win in every single universe.
Right. Well, that's true now. I mean, right? There are world-building games right now. I don't do them, but I've seen them.
Pretty much, yes. So we could actually, this universe I'm talking about, where everyone can choose to be in a universe of their own design, is a possible thing in the real world without appealing to magic.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Are you aware of the theory that we are actually living in somebody else's game? That we, in fact, are part of a matrix invented by some intergalactic 16-year-old living in his mother's basement?
Right, I think, if I remember correctly, that was Nick Bostrom. Is that correct, who created that? But yeah, the idea is...
Well, the idea's been floating around. It may be, the name is familiar, but there was a discussion that was quite popular, led by Neil deGrasse Tyson online, with several, Max Tegmark, the mathematician, was there, and a lot of other good physicists. And they were asking, a simple question, is there evidence that we are living in a simulation? In other words, a game. And the answer was yes, there is. In fact, we probably are.
Right. I believe the argument was that if we can create artificial universes, the number of artificial universes will be greater than the number of actual universes. So probabilistically, we're more likely to be in an artificial universe than the actual universe.
And what's the difference between artificial and an actual universe? I mean, then if we're living in an artificial universe, we have no idea what an actual universe is. It's probably an actual universe is like what most universes would be, namely hydrogen atoms, period. And nothing else, because the chances of having, more than that are pretty small. So, yeah, but when I heard that debate, and interestingly, one of the physicists in the room, whose name is now escaping me, he's very well known, mentioned this, but what my reaction was, what is the difference between a simulator, alien, and God. I mean, if you can accept the idea that we may be living in a created simulation universe, how is that different from what we are living in a universe created by God?
Right, and I'm kind of going off of that argument. I'm saying that if this universe was designed, whoever designed it can't be moral, can't be all good, because the way it's designed is pretty evil. The fact that we're forced to be here against our will and we're forced to experience suffering. We don't have the option to go to our own universe. Whoever designed this world can't be an all good designer. And so that means that,
Well,
from my perspective, there's a contradiction in the Christian idea.
well, if what you said just now is right, in other words, that we do have the power because of our minds, our consciousness, our souls, to make our own universes, well, then we have that option. We can make our own universes if we don't like this one. Can
Yes,
we live in them? Well, maybe, depending on how you define live.
but it still seems
So,
immoral to force us to live in this world without that capability just immediately. It seems like if we were given the option immediately, just from the moment of wherever we become conscious, to just go to our own universe and say, this world does not seem that good. I'd rather not be here. I'll just go to my own universe. That option seems significantly more moral than the world we are in now, even with all of the capabilities we have.
so if we get to that point at some point in the future, that won't count. The question is that we don't have it now.
Right. If we get to the point in the future, then that universe or that reality will be better than what we have now, but it won't eliminate the immoralities of the past. It won't stop the immorality from happening.
Oh, okay.
So if God created us and immediately gave us the option to go to our own universe, that would be the best of all possible worlds. Instead of forcing us against our will to be in this universe and experience suffering, which we had no choice in. So if we compare those two options, it seems to me that the option to go to our own universe immediately is a far more moral option than being forced into this universe against our will, even
So
with
I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, even with all of the capabilities we do have.
So, in other words, what I think I hear you saying is that this is a question of timing. In other words, what you're saying is that we should be getting the option of where we want to. We shouldn't be forced to live in a world we don't like. That's fascinating. I mean, I haven't heard that before, so I have to think about it a little bit. But right off the bat, it seems to me, when would we know whether we like this universe or not? I mean, I remember being pretty upset at reality at various parts of my life with good reason. And then other times saying, well, I'm really happy to be alive in this particular universe. So how would we be so sure that we knew what decision to make?
Well, you can always change your decision. If you don't like this universe, go to a different one. If you don't like this one, go to a different one. Or if you want to live in a group, you can go to a communal universe. Or if you want to live under somebody else, go to somebody else's universe. Or if you want to live in this world exactly, you can go to this universe. That seems to be because I wrote a model of objective morality, and my definition of objective morality is that any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. So the best of all possible worlds is just to give everyone their own universe they can do whatever they want with, at which point you can join someone else's universe if they invite you, or you can make communal universes. You can design the world in every way you want. You can even go to a universe exactly like this one we live in now, but it has to be optional. So the only difference between the universe I'm describing and the universe we are in now is that everything you experience has to be voluntary, has to be optional. You can't be forced to do something against your will. And that kind of a universe seems clearly more moral than this kind of a universe.
Whew. Well, it sounds interesting, but I mean, there are some problems. There must be a ton of problems, but only a few come to mind right away. You've written this down, right? You said you published this, or you at least. I mean, is this something I can read about it? It's very interesting.
I've written it down. I haven't published it yet. I'm trying to gain more popularity on my YouTube channel so I can sell more copies.
Okay. Is this the first time you've laid it out there, or you?
I have it in other YouTube videos. There's a number of videos I have where I discuss this.
I'll look for it. Very interesting. Well, I mean, it's an interesting idea. I think it's an idea that is, I think it's somewhat interesting in terms of both questions of philosophical questions of morality and choice. Clearly, you believe in free will because it depends on that. So you're not a determinist.
Well,
right?
it depends on what you mean by free will, because I can grant free will as either in the Dan Dennett's compatibilist sense or in the libertarian free sense. Either way, it doesn't make a difference to my model.
Okay, that's fine. So what you're saying is that free you should be able at any point in time during your life, although I'm not sure how that life would work, but to make any decision to do what basically to do anything, because what you're calling different universes is a way of changing reality so that it fits what you want. Now, to be able to change reality so that it fits what you want at any particular moment, do you see that as something that you would consider part of a naturalist worldview?
Yeah, it's possible in video games right now.
Oh my goodness. So we may have a slight generational problem here.
But I would say that a god could definitely create this, even if it wasn't natural. So the possibility that this is logically possible kind of rules out an all good, all powerful God.
Okay, so an all good, all powerful God could exist if that God granted this kind of universe as a place to be born in, and the kind you're talking about, where all humans or all animals, I mean, who would have this ability to determine where they live, what kind of universe they lived in?
All forms of consciousness, any kind of being that has consciousness.
All forms of consciousness. Okay, could decide. Um, hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, logically, you're right. I mean, that would be nice if God had decided to do that. Uh, but perhaps there's a reason that God didn't decide to do that and decided to give us this world first, with that other world later for some reason which we don't know. Now, when you say all good and all powerful, there are problems with both of those definitions. Do we really understand what's good?
Right. I'm just using those vaguely just to give an idea.
Yeah.
But my
So I'm
response,
not sure we do. So I'm not willing to rule out. I admit that an all-powerful, all-good God is contradictory to common experience, and many theologians do as well. And they come up with the kinds of things that I came up with. Well, I didn't come up with it, that I quote. That Jesus Christ is our model, and suffered, and that's our model for getting through this world. But nobody denies that this is a world, a vale of tears. I mean, that's part of theology. So it's an interesting take, and your version, and I have to admit it's new to me, so it bears some thought. But it doesn't convince me not to believe in God, because I actually kind of resist the gaming world as an alternative reality. I think it's fun. It can be fun, but even the Matrix view, the simulation view, I find not very convincing for us. Although it has some logical, power. But I would rather wait until I find out exactly what God had in mind, and it'll be one of my first questions when I'm able to ask, what exactly did you mean by, World War II, for example? What was the purpose there?
I think that's a good point. And the way I would respond is just saying, wouldn't it be better, even if God had some reason to put us into this world, if he gave us the option and said, I have this reason, and now you can choose, would you like to experience this world for this reason that I have,
Mm-hmm.
or would you like
Mm-hmm.
to opt out? And that still seems like a more morally superior option than him just unilaterally forcing us to be here against our will. Wouldn't you agree?
I don't think universe. I mean, yeah. I mean, the only way to I would agree with that, making some assumptions, which is that there are other worlds available, which we don't know. Um, and I don't know, even if there were other worlds available, I'm still not. I still don't haven't thought about this enough to think whether or not that's a great idea. Uh, so here's a place where I'll go back to your original thought and say we don't know. We don't know what God was thinking or why, but the nice thing about Christianity, one of the nice things about Christianity, which is important to keep in mind, is it's very complex. It's very complicated. It's not a simple thing. Just the concept of the Trinity is very complex. What does it mean that God is three persons and all that? And so not every question is easily answerable. And I like that because that reflects science as well, which is my other way of looking at the world. Things are very, very complex in the scientific understanding of reality. Gaming worlds, on the other hand, are deceptively simple. And that's why I kind of don't believe in them. Because you have the choice, you can make up your own rules and everything fits the rules. And, that's not, to me, that by definition, that's kind of not reality. And for example, when I watch a movie, what I look for is, are you going to surprise me or is this going to be a formula? Is it going to be something interesting? Is it going to reflect what's beautiful about reality? And to me, the surprises and the complexity of reality is beautiful. I love fractals. I think fractals are an amazing thing. And I think it's wonderful that we've discovered that almost everything in reality is fractal in nature. And that's really complicated. It's very complex. There's very little simplicity. What's remarkable is that so many of the physical laws, the laws of nature, are simple. And that shouldn't be. And I think we've discovered them all. The theory of everything is not going to be simple. You're familiar with Fermat's last theorem, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
I'm pretty familiar with physics and mathematics.
Great. So answer this. So how is it that Fermat's last theorem was solved, right?
Recently, I think it was
Andrew Wiles.
1 or 2 years ago.
Oh no, it was more like a couple of decades ago. But the guy who solved it had ingenious proof, but it required a huge amount of empirical testing using supercomputers. So that wasn't Fermat's proof, obviously, who lived in the 18th century. So, it's likely that Fermat got it wrong, whatever he came up with, whatever his proof was. No, it probably wasn't real. Because, the theory of everything is going to be just as complicated. And so we've got all the simple stuff. Now everything is very complicated. So when I look at a game which says you can design the rules, you can make everybody happy, you can live in a world where everybody's happy, my thought is, yeah, really? I got to see that to believe it. I want empirical evidence that that's possible, because I don't think it is.
I wonder what would qualify as empirical evidence. Like if we could just show you the level of detail video games can produce, would that satisfy that as an empirical test?
No, but detail is easy. That's not. I would like to do experiments and see whether the whole system works or crashes. Now, I'm sure I could devise very quickly an experiment that would make it crash. One of my hobbies used to be, the Game of Thrones is a very popular series. I hated it. I couldn't watch it. I eventually stopped watching it. And the reason was my wife was getting really tired of watching it with me because every 10 minutes I said, oh, come on, that's not possible. That's ridiculous. That could never happen in any history. Because I know history. I know how things work. And, I just, and I do the same thing when I watch science fiction. I said, well, please at least learn some physics before you write a script on science fiction. It's a problem being a nerd, right? I mean, that's what happens. So, these magical worlds that you speak about, I think I could probably disprove any of them relatively quickly. I haven't tried, but it sounds like fun. I might try it. Oh, hang on, I lost you.
Oh, there you go. Okay. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
I would respond with Clarke's first law. If a wise, elderly, educated scientist says something is possible, he's probably true. But if the same scientist says something is impossible, he's probably wrong. because there's been lots of times in history where scientists were said it's impossible to break the sound barrier. It's impossible for
Yeah,
computers to understand mathematics without being able to
right.
consciously understand it. It's impossible to go to space. They've all been proven wrong, like over and over and over again, with like a
Well,
few exceptions.
It's also impossible to build a perpetual motion machine, and that won't work.
I would object. I'd say it's
Oh,
impossible, no, given the known laws of physics, but there could always be more.
okay. Yes, there could. There could always be more laws of physics. In fact, that was the argument I was making to you a short while ago about quantum mechanics. Some of those laws of physics may actually turn out to indicate, in fact, I think some of them already do, that there is a God and that God is present in the natural world. I think some of the laws of biology that we're uncovering are heading in that direction.
Okay.
So, yeah, I can't argue with that. And you may be right. Maybe it would be possible to create a world that was self-sustaining, as our world apparently is. It's also possible that our world is also not self-sustaining, and that we need God to continually intervene in it. We don't know that either. So there's a lot of we don't knows in this last part of this discussion. So maybe we should just leave it at that.
All right. Well, as a final comment, my combination is that I do agree that there has to be some fundamental nature of reality, kind of like a necessary something. But I
Yeah.
would say it's probably not a being, especially not an all good one. I'd lean more towards the naturalistic pantheism view of just a kind of eternal, all powerful, necessary nature. And I
Mhm.
think that's more likely, especially because of the problem of suffering.
Well, that's what I believed for a very long time, and I've heard other people say, "Oh, the universe is telling me," and the universe wants this, and et cetera. And I think that that's a substitute for God. I mean, you can call it that. You can call it a natural force. I remember doing that for many years. There's some natural force that, and what the Christian. You're right about one thing. What Christianity adds to that. Is this notion of goodness. I mean, Judaism doesn't really stress the goodness of God, does it? I mean, Christianity came from Judaism. Judaism doesn't talk about God being that good of a guy. If you look at the Old Testament, he doesn't come across as a really nice guy in many parts. What Christianity added to that was this concept of basically of love, which is considered, the essence of goodness, and I like that. Now, is it logically coherent with all powerfulness? As I said, that's a toughie. And you've probably found the best reason that there is to remain an atheist, but that question probably has an answer. And you may be close to the answer, and when you find that answer, you might change some of your views. I'm not being an apologist here. I'm not suggesting that you do, but you might.
Yeah, I definitely like your comment on goodness, though I would say that we can also have objective morality, and pantheism is just an undiscovered law of nature, just one of those unknowns we don't know
It
about yet.
could be. It could be. That's right.
So
That's right.
it was
Could
really
be.
nice talking with you. I really enjoyed our
Yeah,
conversation.
it was fun. Enjoyed it.
I hope to talk with you again sometime.
Why not? Take care.
Have a nice day.
Bye, Tom.